Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about harem, specifically the genre of harems in anime, manga, video games. And I've actually done a video in the past where I talked about harems. It's been a while. Like, I'd actually looked it up recently. It was like 5 years ago. But I think in that, I was more so talking about how, like, right, with harems, like, there's always going to be that, right, despite everything, like, more often than not, it just comes down to a character basically choosing one person. And it's just, I don't think I ever got into the other elements of harems. Maybe I did, but even if I did, I'm just going to revisit that subject just because this all kind of got sparked for me specifically revisiting the harem subject is because I was recently on Reddit and I was on the subreddit for Kaseki Trails video game series, and a conversation had come up about I'd seen a post where someone had a criticism about the game, specifically about Rin having basically a harem around him. Because basically this game is kind of, if you're familiar with the Persona games, this game has like a social link aspect to it. So obviously there are male characters you can get close to, very much like Persona, but you can kind of get these like deeper relationships, almost like basically like romantic relationships with female characters, and like there's a large roster of ladies in Rin's life that he can get close to like that, right? So a criticism against the game was the fact is that that was kind of a thing. I mean, there's other criticism, but there's actually one thing in particular. I want to save that for a separate video entirely. But I thought it was such an interesting thing that people had an issue with that, and I'm curious why. Is it just because of the cliche of what a harem is, like that gets used and played up? But I feel like, and maybe this is my misconception, because I feel like in Japanese media, a lot of like sex and stuff kind of gets used for comedic purposes. Harems tend to be used in comedic purposes and romantic purposes, obviously, but it's like, right, all these characters like this particular character, obviously, like whether it's a traditional harem of like, oh, a whole bunch of girls like one male character, or a reverse harem where it's like, right, this is one female character surrounded by a whole bunch of males. So, but I don't know whether that's kind of a cliche for some people and they don't like that, whether it's just kind of like, right, because it fits too much into like that whole like, oh yeah, like someone's dream being like a male dream of being surrounded by so many women. Like, I don't know whether that cliche just doesn't hit well with people and they just feel like it doesn't really do or add much to a story. Once again, I feel like a lot of like sexual and romantic stuff tends to be used kind of jokingly in Japanese media. Maybe that's just, once again, my misconception, because usually harems are that situation like, oh man, you're with this particular person, and then you get kind of like a tsundere type of situation of like someone getting jealous because they secretly like you but they don't let it on. Like, you know, like I said, it gets used typically for more comedic purposes. I actually got recommended some videos where it's like, oh, harem videos or like in animes when another female character finds out like you're close to this other character and they get jealous of you. I actually kind of got recommended that. I don't know where that came from, just YouTube doing its thing, I guess. But regardless, I just think it's kind of interesting because I think I get it in comparison to like the other like games in the Trails series. None of that happens. It doesn't really come up in the Sky games. There's a small element of it in the Crossspell games, but even then I'd say like really truthfully when it comes to Lloyd in particular, the main protagonist, one of the main protagonists, but kind of the lead protagonist of the Crossspell games, it's really down to two people. I'd say like Ellie and Orisha are the most, but I think there's other characters like Cecile, Ilya that you can kind of like lump in like that, but I really put it down to Orisha and Ilya. But then once again you get to Rin, that roster is like bananas, like the amount of ladies in his life essentially. So I think for people, they wanted it to be a more intimate story, kind of like the Estelle and Joshua of Sky. Once again, all this kind of means nothing if you've never played the Trails games, but the point is like everything was a little more refined to like an intimate story and like love story in the other games, whereas this one is like, no, once again, it's a very Persona-esque where there's no like, generally speaking, canonical like significant other. Once again, Persona-esque. It's just kind of like, yeah, your waifu was your waifu type of situation, right? But I think that it just led me to like a larger discussion in my head and wondering like why that is an issue. Like, I don't have a problem with the harem stuff because I think I kind of lean into like the whole like, oh, comedy of it all. But I'd be interested to kind of read more into it. Like, maybe it's my misconception thinking that a lot of people have an issue with it, but just like it was kind of a knock against the game in particular that they decided to go down that route. And I don't know if Persona ever gets knocked for that necessarily, but I was just thinking it was interesting that this was a person's criticism, which, you know, you're entitled to your criticism, obviously, but I thought it was such an interesting criticism to hold against the game. But I think in comparison, it was just like, for them, this is kind of like my general understanding. I think they felt like, once again, it was like lazy writing. It's just like, right, rather than kind of like building like a genuine and heartfelt relationship, where I think a lot of like the relationships in this so-called harem, there are genuine moments between the characters. Once again, I have my canonical person, a waifu in my head, because I'm like, there's a lot more of a clearer connection between Reen and Elisa just in the main story, even aside from like bonding stuff, and it's a lot deeper connection than maybe like the other characters. There's some other exceptions, but you know, I'm not going to spend the entire video traipsing back through like, you know, trails of Code Steel stuff, but maybe it's like, right, once again, stuff was more intimate in previous games, and in this game, it's just, they maybe felt like it was more lazy writing, just being like, oh, and he's surrounded by all these women, because they probably hate, like, right, like, this series is so wonderful for you to lean into such a cliche thing like a harem. They felt like potentially take away from the story, because at least the next arc in that video game franchise, I don't think there's a harem situation that at least I'm aware of. The little I've looked into the game's only out in Japan, so I've avoided looking at anything because I'm waiting to play it when it eventually gets here to US. Well, gets localized, but I don't know. I just thought it was kind of an interesting discussion point that I kind of want to share with you guys, because I'd love to get to know your thoughts in the comments down below. And you know, obviously, you know, if you're more familiar with, like, you don't have to even be specifically the video games I'm referencing, because I have talked about it in the past. Like, I've watched quite a handful of harem anime as well, like with that harem element to it, and I'd be curious to know your experience with it. Like, have you watched a handful or maybe one or two animes that have that? I want to say like Tenchi Muyo back in the day when I was like in elementary school was probably my first introduction to like the harem drama, without at the time knowing the word for it. But that was probably my first introduction. That like Tenchi Universe and Tenchi Tokyo, those three series was kind of my first introduction to like a harem series, and I just thought that was like, oh, it's an interesting concept. I don't think because I always focus on the romanticism of it all, and not in the sense of like, oh, being surrounded by pretty girls and blah blah blah, like the male fantasy or whatever. It's more so like I looked at it from like the complicated love triangle of it all, where I'm just like, oh, I feel so bad, because once again, I've talked about that in the past, like with the harem situation, I want everyone to walk away happy, but not everyone is. I mean, I haven't always seen a conclusive harem situation brought to a conclusive close. I'm not saying there aren't any stories, but there aren't any that I've completed that I'm aware of that kind of have that a clear-cut answer. There's one I can think of, and that's like Rosario plus Vampire. That's a pretty clear-cut, like, the main protagonist, Sukune chose Mocha. Spoilers if you've never, but like it was always kind of implied heavily, but that's a heavy like harem related series as well. So, but like I said, obviously, just let me know your experience with harems in like video games and anime and manga. Is it a genre that you're just like, you wish it was done away with because it's a cliche? Do you believe it's lazy writing? Do you just not enjoy it? Like, I'd love to know your thoughts about it. Are you indifferent to it? Do you like it? Just I want to know. I'm legitimately curious where people stand on this subject. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good